This is BT World. I'm Syed Shabahat Ali, and you're watching Fault Lines. The regime of Narendra Modi is getting increasingly difficult for the minorities in India. All the minorities, including Christians and Muslims, are now facing this fascist regime and taking the brunt of state-led and state-sponsored wave of violence and terrorism. With the silence of the state institution and law enforcement agencies, this is getting increasingly intolerant and difficult for the people of India. Not only to this extent, but also to the extent of people of Kashmir who are now being deprived from their genuine and legitimate leadership. We'll also try to find out why all of this is happening in context of the regional developments happening in South Asia. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
India is hurtling towards worst modern-day autocracy as it is employing malicious tactics to intimidate indigenous Kashmiri leaders. In the latest act of state-sponsored repression, Indian regime has sentenced Kashmiri pro-freedom leader Yasin Malik to life in prison in a sham case. The iconic freedom fighter Yasin Malik has been under detention at Delhi's Tihar jail since 2019, along with several other top pro-freedom leaders and activists. Highlighting bleak contours of India's eroding democratic credentials, marginalization of Indian Muslims exacerbated under BJP rule owing to discriminatory policies and state-sponsored oppression by Hindutva regime, sparking fears of further marginalization of Muslims under the government of Narendra Modi. Indian state's assault on holy sites and religious sensitivities of Muslims continue unabated. Earlier in their bid to humiliate and assert Hindu supremacy, schools and colleges in India's southern state of Karnataka barred entry of Muslim girls and women who wear hijab. That created ripples across the country. Under the garb of so-called delimitation, the representation of Muslims in the redesignated constituencies in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir had been reduced to their disadvantage. Since Modi came to power in 2014, Hindu mobs have lynched scores of Muslims suspected of transporting cows or consuming beef, and thus India stands at brink of Rohingya-type ethnic cleansing of Indian Muslims.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first guest in the program is Mr. Muhammad Faizan Fakhr. He is Assistant Research Associate at IPRI. He's recently wrote about this issue in newspaper, so we invited him and thought it will be excellent to speak to him one-on-one. Faizan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we are just discussing this problem that is becoming increasingly visible. Now, in your article, you have also raised your concerns that this entire system cannot last very long. You also said that secularism in itself is under question in India. Why do you believe secularism in India is on its deathbed?
Well, you see, India has always been, facing this issue of communal violence and anti-minority sentiments right from the very beginning. It's proved by the existence of RSS even before the partition of India. And you see, with the election of BJP, what has changed is this entire component of communal violence and anti-minority sentimentism has become more visible. It has become more pronounced. The recent wave of communal rights, which were witnessed by the length and the breadth of the country, starting from Delhi to Gujarat to Goa to Maharashtra, everywhere you see how Hindutva forces were unleashed, and they were given the full support of the state. They had the entire backing of the state machinery. And while they committed pillage, they committed murder, the state machinery, the state institutions were silent. Not only silent, they were even graphics of Delhi police actively participating in pelting the stones on the victims. More than that, after this dying out of this entire riot, the administration of the city initiated this drive of demolition of the properties of the victims, no less. So that is why I argue that this entire this new wave of communal rights is not just an event in isolation. It is more than that. It is a process. It is a phenomena which is here to stay, and it is going to take the entire country. It's going to sweep the entire country.
Itizaz Ahsan has also written a book on this subject, Divided by Democracy, India and Pakistan. And in the book, he argues that the establishment of India as a political setup, as a political enterprise, as the world's largest democracy is primarily because of the fact that it's a democracy that relies on the secular values. Now, why do you believe this system might not continue for very long? Do you believe this is one of the challenges that the democracy will be facing in Narendra Modi's India?
Yes, of course. You see, the principal values of democracy are tolerance, coexistence, and inclusiveness. All of these principles have been compromised. And now the international organizations like Genocide Watch have been raising alarm of impending doom, impending genocide in India. And the key strategic ally of India, like USA, is also raising concerns of the human rights abuses within the country. When you look at the politics of BJP, you see the value of symbolism, which is, religion is invoked again and again, mythology is invoked again and again. Why is it happening? Why BJP is relying on, the whole utility of symbolism is because when you create hate against an entire community, you have to mobilize, masses. And right now, majority of the masses are backing, BJP forces and the Hindutva forces. So right here, you see a suicide of democracy. You see the democracy is being killed systemically, while the minorities face a systemic and a structural violence at the behest of the government.
And do you agree with me on the fact that BJP is primarily benefiting out of it by actually extending their likeliness or their following from the extremist elements within the Hindu society of India?
Of course it is. You see, BJP is a part of the problem. But my entire argument is that BJP is not only the problem. It's not the problem. The problem is bigger than that. You see, BJP is a part of this Sangh Parivar. It's a term used for exclusionist Hindu nationalist groups who have the same parent ideology which they derive from RSS. You see the likes of groups like VHS, Hindu Mahasabha, Bajrang Dal, Shiv Sena. All of these groups had their culmination point back in the 1990s when they actively took part in the demolition of the Babri Mosque, and later on the subsequent communal violence between Hindus and Muslims in Mumbai. So that was the eruption point, but they have always existed, maybe on the fringes, but right now they're on the mainstream. They have got the power, they have got what they wanted to do. So what I say is BJP is part of the problem, but the process is bigger than that. The entire issue is bigger than that. It's something which is now being deeply entrenched in the social fabric of India. So that is why I make the argument that Hindutva or the hate-driven ideology of seclusionism is here to stay. And it is likely to be adopted by almost all the political parties of India in absence of a strong alternative. There is no strong alternative, there is no strong counter-narrative to this sort of an ideology.
Well, Faizan, that actually gives birth to two questions, and I'll gel them together so that you can respond them collectively. One is that where are the rest of the democratic forces of the country? Because it's a democracy, it's not a one-party system, or it's not something that emerged overnight. So why we do not hear a lot from the other democratic forces? And besides, why just unlike other democracies, this is not being criticized in the mainstream media, because media becomes a very important part of India's overall political enterprise.
So to answer you first, for the first part of the question, there are other parties, parties like Congress, and there are other Muslim parties even. They are raising concerns, but they are not as organized as they should be. They have their own differences, they have their own issues to deal with. With the majority mobilized in favor of Hindutva forces, the minority in percentage becomes very low. Right now, India has a minority of 22%. But that also, when you translate it into numbers, Muslims of India are more than 200 million people. But they are not as organized as they should be, first thing. Secondly, when you talk about media, I think almost all the pillars of the state have now been extremely politicized. Starting from judiciary to legislative to media. For example, for the last few weeks, the biggest issue being covered by the media is this issue of Gyan Vapi Mosque. It's a mosque in Varanasi which is adjacent to a temple. So there is a legal battle between Hindus and Muslims in the court going on where Hindus are claiming that the mosque should be a part of the temple. So you see how media is gaslighting the real issues, how media is deflecting the population from the from paying attention to the real issues, the socio-economic disparities, the issues of lack of infrastructure, unemployment, poverty. These issues are not being discussed. Media has only become a mouthpiece of the current government. So that is how they have been able to sweep away the entire democratic machinery of the country.
And Faizan, since on the partition, even Pakistan was created out of India, it was carved out of India, primarily banking upon similar sentiments that their leadership had back then. And Muslims then finally decided to make a separate homeland. Now, my question is, will this not further aggravate the concerns of other minorities, because we have a Sikh minority that is geographically quite integrated, as you said, Muslims, and then there are pockets of Christians as well, pockets of some other sects of Hinduism who do not enjoy the same harmony with the mainstream Hindutva ideology that is prevailing at the moment. So, do you believe this is going to be another concern for India in the times to come?
Yes, there are two components to this question of yours, and this is a very interesting subject, and also very unfortunate that all the minorities are now walking in India with a target on their back. Muslims are the biggest minority, so that is why Muslims enjoy the spotlight when it comes to the issue of anti-minority sentiments in India. But other minorities are also facing similar kind of violence at the behest of the government and the Hindutva forces. Secondly, when you talk about Pakistan being carved out of India, I believe that we live in a very unique part of the world. This is a part of the world where 3 nuclear states share borders with each other. One of the biggest population resides in this little corner of the world. So issues like these have a spillover effect, right? So if you talk about this impending genocide in India, it is going to have a spillover effect on the region and also on the world at large. So the world cannot stay silent, it cannot give its lukewarm response to the issue as it has been doing so far. My argument is that somebody needs to take notice. The international community needs to take serious notice of the situation, and it needs to coordinate and synergize its efforts in order to stop
but Faizan, my question was regarding the grievances of the minorities living inside India, like Sikhs and like Muslims, who are geographically together in many parts of the country. Will it not actually provoke their sentiment of started looking for something outside India, because certainly the mainstream population is now not giving them a very good time?
I think in the modern times, when you talk about having nation states, activities like this or concerns like this culminate into protests, demonstrations. Minorities are certainly feeling very alienated and otherized at the hands of the majority, but to actually move towards another solution or move towards a situation where you have a separate homeland for yourself, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, it's very challenging, and I think that it will be difficult for the minorities, but they are slowly and gradually coming to grips with the reality of what is happening to them.
Thank you very much, Faizan Fakhr, for being our guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our first guest in the program. We'll take a break and we'll join you back with the second segment of program. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And when we talk about the plight of Muslims in India, Kashmir becomes a very important part of the conversation, because the Indian occupied Kashmir is the valley where the state brutality is at its very peak. Recently, the verdict given against a leader of Kashmiri Muslims, Mr. Yasin Malik, caught attention of the people from around the world. We had an extensive conversation in this regard in our previous program. We'll continue the same conversation in the second segment of today's program, where my guest is Dr. Mujahid Gilani. He is a Kashmiri analyst. Dr. Shahab, welcome you to my program.
I'm really grateful. Thank you for having me.
And we are discussing the fact that with all of this happening, we lost Sayyid Ali Gilani Sahab under detention. Syed Rabi Sahib is still under detention in Tahar jail, and now Yasin Malik Sahab has been removed from the picture, given sentence for the rest of his life, even though since 2014 he's in confinement a way or another. Why? How do you see this larger picture bringing all these blocks together? What India is exactly trying to achieve by all of this?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. See, your question is pertinent about if we consider the legitimate Kashmiri struggle and the people who actually represent the Kashmiri aspirations and the wishes, the true wishes and demands of the Kashmiri people. It is these heroes, these particular leaders who just you named over here, Sayyid Ali Gilani Sahab, Ashraf Khan Sehrai, Yasin Malik, Dr. Qasim Faktu, Masrat Alam Butt Sahab, Yasin Malik, Asiya Andrabi Sahiba, all of these leaders actually represent the people of Kashmir, their true aspirations. For once, India considers that incarcerating these leaders may actually silence the Kashmiris. We also know that back in 2019, when India was about to abrogate the Article 375 and 370, India actually incarcerated these leaders, and not only these leaders, but also those who were inside the Srinagar Central Jail. They were transferred off to different jails in India. But we also know that today the struggle of Kashmiris, the youth of Kashmir, are actually standing on the roads. They're actually rebelling against whatever actions India is taking inside Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. For once, this leadership, whatever it had to teach to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, it has done so. For once, the spirit, the zest and the zeal has trickled down to the youth of Kashmiris.
Don't you think it will become increasingly more difficult for any political conversation to take place, because such disputes cannot always be sorted out, have never been sorted out with barrel of the gun. Power is the last thing to silence the voice of any nation. So in absence of this entire political leadership from the surface, don't you think it will be more difficult to deal with the youth that has zeal and fervor of Sayyid Ali Gilani, of Yasin Malik, of all the leaders that you named out, but yet they would not have a formal structure of their leadership in place?
See, in the words of a Kashmiri, particularly in the words of Manan Bashir Wani, when occupation is ugly, the resistance cannot be beautiful. This has to be accepted for once. Number two, the element is that the youth of Kashmir at this time are not a disintegrated mob. They unfortunately are without a leader, but right now we have leaders in different tiers, the third and the fourth tier, the localities, the mohalla leaders that we have. They represent the aspirations of the Kashmiri people. Yes, it is true that the political environment has been curbed by India, and India essentially is shortening and delimiting the political environment in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, leaving essentially no space for a political movement to grow. And the only, I believe, let's be very honest about it, that the only solution then therefore will be left for the Kashmiri people at this point in time, when they are being killed, maimed and murdered every day, will be only one thing that India needs to really fear about.
And they have leveled the charges of terrorism, violence, collection of funds for sponsoring extremism and terrorism. This to a leadership that genuinely believes in dialogue. If barrel of the gun was the only option that this leadership had, they would have never appeared on surface, would have always. But how do you counter these arguments?
We actually need to redefine the terminologies. For once, if we believe that this Yasin Malik, this leader, this person is a terrorist through the Indian lens and through the Indian prism, then yes, we believe in Indian laws, then yes, he is a terrorist. But for once again, if you consider and look at Yasin Malik's peaceful struggle through the Kashmiri prism, he is not a terrorist. He is a freedom fighter. We need to redefine terminologies and believe that the legal courts in India are not an instrument of providing justice. They're not an instrument of actually enforcing the true laws, because whatever law India has enacted in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we Kashmiris denounce it. And by virtue of that, we are all terrorists in the eyes of Indian law.
Certainly, last week the major development of delimitation was catching headlines everywhere in the world. I also wanted to seek your comments. You were not available. How would you comment to this political re-engineering done by India, and do you believe this will yield them any results that they intend to be seen in the political panorama of Kashmir?
See, Indian designs have been very clear ever since 2013, when the BJP-led government by Narendra Modi came into power. We need to understand that India is moving step by step ahead towards Actually, first it had occupied Kashmir back in 1947, and now it has illegally annexed Kashmir with India. And we need to understand that from 2013 till today, 2022, every step that is being taken is pre-planned. This Delimitation Act, the Domicile Act, even the abrogation of the Articles 335A and 370 are a part of the manifesto of the BJP. Through the Delimitation Act, we also understand that BJP is going to promote a demographic desettlement. Let's be honest about it. The Muslims are going to be extradited, either maimed, killed, or taken into jails outside Srinagar and outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and the looters, the Hindu goons, the RSS goons are going to get settled in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is what the Delimitation Act is, that ultimately the power, the chief minister, the union minister, or whoever comes into power in the union territories of both Jammu and Kashmir as well as Ladakh is going to be a Hindu or an RSS Hindutva ideology follower.
Taking advantage of your presence in this program, I would like to understand what are the sentiments of a common Kashmiri living under all of this and seeing Indian oppressions unfolding since 2013, as you listed out the list of events that are taking place. Is that actually adding into their agony, or have they surrendered against the fact that Indian designs are now so vicious that they just can't do anything about it? That is what is being said by most of the Indian media abroad, that there are no voices coming out of Indian occupied Kashmir. All the voices are coming out of Pakistan. So I want your a quick response on that.
See, the answer to it lies actually in the fold that you need to understand that the Indian oppression is not only in one field of life. We need to understand that we are oppressed not only educationally, we also have human rights violations in the cultural aspect, in the military aspect, in the health aspect, in even a simple Kashmiri life that is being led every day to day. I had actually quoted the example of Shikara people, the taxi drivers, those who are apple growers, the walnut growers, the saffron growers, the farmers of Kashmir. Every single person is actually affected by the Indian hegemony. So it's not necessary that a person who is being affected by the Indian hegemony comes out on the road, takes a stone in his hand and starts a stone pelting. Anybody who writes Hum kya chahte azadi on the apples, on the Kashmiri apples, and those Kashmiri apples get exported to India, or on those burnt walnuts that are actually being burnt by the Indian forces, they themselves, these walnuts and these apples, are a sign of resistance. This has to be taken into account, that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are at every level against India. At any level, we do not want India inside Kashmir, because we do not consider ourselves as part of the whole Indian dominion. Whether it is through the protests, whether it is through stone pelting, whether it is through universities, education, through pen, ink, barrel of the gun, whatever instrument we have, we do not want India on the land of state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you very much for being blunt about it, because there is a lot on the surface when we see the international media. The Indian narrative is quite dominant there. Now, one more important factor is that India is a hegemonic character in this region, and it diplomatically also hegemons. The diplomatic discourse of the world revolves around the narrative being propelled by India's diplomacy. But despite all of that, OIC was quite vocal about not only the delimitation process first, but also about the issue of Mr. Yassin Malik. They once tweeted about it, India protested, and again we saw a statement coming out of OIC. A country, an organization dominated by Arab leadership, with which India has great trade relationship. Absolutely. How do you see these statements coming?
For once, yes, it is very important that we need to appreciate OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, because it has been reprimanded earlier before whenever its role comes over for Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But yes, OIC has been taking firm stance not only on the delimitation process, on the illegal acts of 5th August 2019, but also on different political prisoners other than Yassin Malik Sahab as well. For Assia Andrabi, who was convicted in the previous year, OIC had also issued a statement for her as well. The IPHRC the particular Kashmir contact group of the OIC had issued several statements, and not only issued several statements, they also visited Pakistan to gain even more light and information about particularly the political prisoners in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So yes, I believe that OIC is definitely playing a role in this time. Even if it's up to the statements, issuing statements again and again and standing firm on those statements, I believe this is going to help.
But I understand what you said, but you see many other humanitarian organizations that apparently champions the cause of human rights have stayed silent on all of this happening. Not only this time, but also against all the acts of brutality in the past. And we have many examples. We even don't see United Nations putting its foot down for the enforcement of what have been decided. So how do you compare it with other major organizations in the world that could have played their part and have not played their part ever since?
Partly, I believe that we need to understand that the Kashmir diplomacy, the advocacy needs to be refined further. Let's be very frank about it. If I'm supposed to convince you about the IIJK part, and I'm supposed to convince you that it's not a territorial matter, rather it is the matter of the people and the humans, live actual humans who are living over there in the largest open air prison of the world, I need to talk to you about it. I need to tell you my story. I need to tell you that there are women who have not seen their kids, their children, their sons over the past 30 years, and they do not know whether they're alive or dead. I need to tell you about the half orphans, about the half widows, about such stories that are actually going to tell you that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are not machines. They are actually humans. They have flesh, they have a heart, they have feelings, everything exactly the same way that the West or the people, the humans living in the West have. This is what needs to be transmitted towards you, towards the West, towards the prosperous world, towards the people who have power and who have say, and perhaps who can actually impose sanctions or tell India, direct India, that at least they need to lower down the cost of freedom struggle in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And that is the human cost. Every day, at least 2 to 3 Kashmiris are being martyred in the valley. And that is a very, very high human cost that we Kashmiris are paying at this time.
And you said advocacy needs to be redefined. So how would you like to see, what changes would you like to see in this advocacy that is happening? Because with the development of social media, now the power of media has also gone down to the masses. People at large are empowered now with their smart devices. They can perhaps raise their voices. So what exactly would you like to see, particularly with the role of our youth, that is a big power when we talk about the demographics?
See, I consider that there are 2 to 3 things that need to be understood. One is the internationalization of the Kashmir issue. The second is the internalization of the Kashmir aspect. For the internalization of the Kashmir aspect, perhaps for the Pakistani youth, the social media is enough, and perhaps can work well with the videos, with the pictures and the photographs that come out of the IIJK, the valley, and the people of Pakistan get to know what exactly is happening in the valley. But for the international aspect, you need to bring out the Kashmiris, the people who are the actual stakeholders, those who have their families, those who have not seen their families for the past several decades, and those who have given their sweat and blood towards this struggle. They need to be internationalized. You need to bring them out, and not only towards Geneva, towards the United Nations, but also to the other powers of the world, such as the US, the UK, the European countries, the other countries that actually matter and have a say in the United Nations. Internationalize the Kashmiri stories. If you do that, you are actually going to divert yourself from the rhetoric that has been taking place over the past 30 years towards actually humanizing the Kashmir conflict, which India has very successfully dehumanized to just simple as being Pakistani sponsored, as being non-indigenous, or as dabbing us as terrorists. This is what needs to stop. Humanize us, humanize the Kashmir story, and you will get what the Kashmiris want.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mujahid Gilani, for adding substantial value in today's program.
Grateful. Very grateful.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Dr. Mujahid Gilani, and he shared a lot of wisdom with us. A lot of his points that he brought today to this program need to be understood by us, not only by us as the people of this country, but also by us as citizens of of this collective world that we all inhabit together. Kashmir has always been portrayed, has always been showcased as a territorial dispute, as he very rightly pointed out. But as long as the Kashmir's problem is not told to the entire world in a comprehensive manner, by humanizing the stories that are coming out of this entire crisis, it is not possible for the people from around the world to understand the gravity of situation. And a recent example is the example of the issue of Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia, two countries that have lived together for so many years, had a dispute, and dispute went so violent that it took shape of a complete war. A war that is now posing daunting threats to the peace of entire globe. And yet we are only listening to one part of the story, the part of the story that is supporting the Ukrainians' point of view, a part of the story that does not cover the Russians' point of view. Why is it so? Because the entire Western media outlet is standing firmly behind Ukraine a way or another. One more important aspect of this entire episode that Dr. Mujahid Gilani Saab very briefly mentioned is the integration of the problem of Kashmir and all of this happening to the people or to the Muslims living inside India, or to the minorities living inside India, as well as the problem of Kashmir, are connected with the larger picture of India in this region, a hegemonic character that is trying to do something big, something that we need to understand. And to understand this larger and bigger picture, I am joined by a famous defense analyst, Abdurrahman Tarar Saab, who appears frequently on my show, and I welcome him again to my program. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Shubhat.
And we are trying to understand, we are trying to connect the dots. We, for last two segments of my program, have been hearing what is happening inside India and what's happening inside Indian-held, Indian-occupied Kashmir. Now, we are trying to connect this to the international picture. And one thing that I would like to add before I take your response is that against Pakistan, the military posture of India is getting more aggressive. There was an unconfirmed news on one of the Western media outlets saying that now India is planning to install S-400 missiles on Pakistan's border. So this is an aggressive posture against a country that is in your immediate neighborhood. Is this an isolated event, or do you actually connect this with the international foreign policy that India is adopting?
Shubhat, we very frequently hear on different channels about Indian aggressive military posture or acquisitions which are Pakistan specific. So we cannot add something very substantial in this debate. But I, after hearing from you this question, I tried to see it from a different angle, that how it has affected India. I think I would agree with Stephen P. Cohen. I think 5 years back he commented on India-Pakistan relationship, and he termed the relations highly toxic, in which he also commented that these two countries feel that they are encircled by each other, and both have suffered a lot in almost a century's time. But if we only consider what India has lost during this time, I think it has lost a very big way. It has consumed everything it had which could enable India to become, if not a global power, but at least a regional power. But because of this unrealistic obsession of defeating Pakistan militarily, it has consumed everything, and today even it is not considered as a regional power, but to talk about global power. On the other hand, if you see, despite many challenges, China has been able to concentrate on economic front, and today it is not only an economic giant, but a military power which is challenging the only global power, that is USA. So many scholars, Western scholars even think that India has been wasting a lot of resources and a lot of time. this S-400 are massive mechanization. What has resulted on the battlefield? You know, in last 20 years or more than 20 years, China kept developing its infrastructure along Himalayas and was able to undo the geographic limitations of military operations in high mountains, whereas India kept concentrating against Pakistan. And when the last 2 years the conflict started, so it became evident that India has been caught unaware, and now it will take another, I think, 1 to 2 decades to even build the required infrastructure which can undo the geographic limitations which India is facing while shifting forces or shifting the required supplies to the battlefield.
This is a very interesting comment, Zahra Sahib. You have, let me rephrase what you said. So you said that despite being one of the largest expenditure doing nations in the world, India's military expenditure is one of the top in the world, it has not been able to dominate the region, let alone internationally. And on the cost of this military development, it has actually not been able to develop its economy when we compare this with China.
You know, the expenditures on military and acquisition of hardware, you know, what has happened with India is that a country which is maybe 8 times smaller than India in size, whose economy is much weaker than India, whose population is, I think, just a fraction, has been able to entangle such a giant which could have, you know, emerged as a global power. So I think Indian policy makers must realize that where they have gone wrong. And on the other hand, now China is, you know, taking leaps, and it is, you know, concentrating on competing at global field, whereas India is still a regional actor, and similarly the Western power, especially USA, is keeping it confined to the region and not allowing it to become a global power.
You are putting a very interesting angle to it, because once we look at the international media, and particularly when we look at the Indian domination in the international media, Indian point of view is entirely different from what you said, and I want you to actually contest it. What India believes is that they have seen the hegemony of China in the Indian Ocean that is hub of international oil and gas trade, and they are trying to counter the Chinese in this Indian Ocean, and trying to take control of Indian Ocean to an extent that China cannot dominate it any further. Now you are saying this is not the case.
Again, I would say that if we look at this phenomenon from a different angle. A few days back, I came across comments of Ashley G. Tellis, who holds the chair in Tata Strategic Institute. And while commenting on Subramaniam Jaishankar's recent book, The Indian Ways, I think its name, The Strategies for India in the New World, and he comments that India is, you know, highly incremental in its approach, and its grand strategy focuses on one thing, which I personally feel that the world is also realizing, that the Indians are trying to reach to as many strategic sweet spots as possible, and benefit from as many contradictions at the world level to gain maximum goals. Like, for example, the moment they saw in 1950s when Tibetan issue came up, so Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai slogan just went away, and they rushed into an alliance with USA. And then came the time in 1960s and 70s when they saw that Chinese and Soviets, they had you know, serious issues. So they rushed towards the Russians, exploited their sensitivities about China, and acquired whatever they wanted. Now, after, you know, Obama's pivot Asia, when they saw that the USA, the only global, you know, superpower, is focusing now primarily on Chinese rise, So they rushed into strategic alliances and forgot about everything. But now, just see that the world is realizing, and many Russian scholars, they also identify this Chinese Indian approach of exploiting contradictions at the world level.
Sarsab, I'm sorry, but I'll cut you here. My question primarily is about the hegemonic designs that India believes China has in the naval region, in the navy of this region, or the oceans of this region, the Indian Ocean, that it believes is a home for world's oil trade. And this is where India believes it is trying to come up with its own strategy to become more powerful from the naval perspective.
While I was commenting on your previous question, I was coming towards this aspect, because West, keep telling India that the Chinese are up to encircle India, and there are different strategies which are in the media. You say like string of pearls, and development of Gwadar port, then some port in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And then that is one, making them realize that they should join international alliances like Quad, and maybe some subsequently any other military alliance against China. But we have to look at this aspect from yet another angle, and that is that India has thousands of miles of coastal belt, and it's a very big country. The type of development it has and its developmental strategy, which speaks of 2030 and maybe 2050, says that it is matter of time when not only China but Indians would tell the world that Indian Ocean is India's ocean. And I have heard and read different Indians' comments, the diplomats as well as scholars, those who talk about India's ocean, Indian Ocean being India's ocean. So the earlier comment which I made about the Indian incremental grand strategy is the same, that in this process of playing on sensitivities of the West, they are acquiring those technologies, those weapons which are essential for becoming first a regional power to dominate Indian Ocean, and then subsequently a global power to tell the West and USA that India is good enough to manage Indian Ocean and they should stay away from there. That may be by saying that China is dominating this part of the world where 70% of the world oil and trade passes. So therefore West and USA should come and help India to build a strong navy which can challenge Chinese ambition.
And United States is banking too much on India, making it a member of Quad, and then going forward with asking India to play a pivotal role against China. On the contrary, we see that China's trade with India thriving further, despite all the military escalation that they had. We also saw a recent example where India refused to go hard on an old ally, Russia, that is now certainly on the very opposite side. It has always been, but now the situation between Russia and the United States is very bad. So how dependable of an ally would be India for United States against China?
Shabat, let's go back to the earlier comments of Ashley J. Tellis, who is an Indian and he heads a chair at Tata Institute of Strategic Studies, the strategic sweet spots, that India would make its utmost effort to gain as much as from international contradictions. On one side, they'll exploit USA. On the other side, they'll keep benefiting from Russia, and they would not compromise on their trade with China. So it's the world which has to realize that which strategy, which alliance the Indians are looking at. So they have a clear-cut strategy that they would try to gain as much goals as possible from the chaotic situation at the international level. So they would exploit Chinese hegemonic designs in the region and beyond. Sometimes, they would exploit Pakistan's, being a country which breeds terrorism throughout the world, and sometimes they would exploit the democracy, where, as everybody knows, which type of a democracy is currently being seen in India. So I think it's high time that the world realizes that this country has its own ambitions and is exploiting everybody's sensitivities, and it would not fight any war on behalf of any alliance or any other country, no matter what it matters.
There is one more question that I would like to understand, and I have asked this question to different guests in my program. Each one have his own perspective, but since you have a background on these matters, what exactly do you believe India tries to achieve by sponsoring militancy and terrorism inside Pakistan, and particularly with regards to Balochistan? Not only it's about just sponsoring militancy and extremism, but we have also seen that in the Western capitals, particularly Geneva, London, there are Indian organizations that are sponsoring Free Balochistan and Baloch Liberation Army. They just brand the city accordingly whenever a major event is taking place, which actually brings it to the spotlight that it is no one else but the state of India behind all of this. What exactly do you believe they try to achieve from such petty actions?
If we analyze the military strength of these two countries, India and Pakistan, the asymmetry was from day one. But what we saw in 1965 war, despite being a bigger country and with a bigger armed forces, they could not achieve anything. And though the Indians, they celebrate victory of 1971, but that was a different war. Pakistan forces were fighting, cut off from their bases, they were encircled, and then they were fighting in a country where the people were not with them. Now, I believe that despite very big differential between these two countries, India could not achieve anything on conventional battlefield, and Pakistan was very successful in blunting its design, may it be Sundarji's doctrine of massive mechanization and aiming to cut Pakistan into two in the desert sectors, or subsequently hit and mobilize strategy where it doesn't allow Pakistan to move its forces in defensive position. What damage India has been able to do to the Pakistan in this unconventional warfare or fifth generation warfare or whatever is happening in Pakistan is unprecedented and at a very low cost. So and then in last 3 to 4 decades, Indians have been able to go to the Western capitals, and they have been able to invest very heavily in the media outlets, and they have been able to brand Pakistan, where Pakistan is actually a victim of terrorism and fifth generation.
Thank you very much, Tarar Shah, for bringing this out. Ladies and gentlemen, this was my last guest in the program, and few very important points that he have made is that whatever India is trying to do against China and against Pakistan has not yielded them any results so far. Very important point that he made is that India's eventual strategy is to declare Indian Ocean as India's ocean, and this certainly will have consequences, and this certainly will have repercussions from all the corners. We'll join you tomorrow again with another program, and until then, Allah Hafiz.